All right, everyone, let's jump right in here. Solving quartic equations. Quartic refers to the fourth power right here, okay? So x to the fourth power minus 10x squared plus 24. Notice the middle term here is half of the leading exponent here, okay? So the degree is 4. That means we'll have at most 4 solutions. If the middle term here is half of that one, then that means we can factor this using quadratic methods, okay? So for example, we're just going to go ahead and jump right in and factor it like we would do with the quadratic equation. So we're going to split this x to the 4 into x squared times x squared. And then we have 24 there. Okay, it's a positive 24, but we need to get negative 10 when we add. So let's do negative 6 times negative 4. And those are my two numbers. Negative 6 times negative 4 is positive 24. But when I add, I get negative 10. So go ahead and put that right here and right there. Okay? And look for any difference of squares if you have any. And we do. We have it right here. This one is not, but this one is. So this will be x minus 2 times x plus 2. And then we could just bring this one down, okay? So we have a total of 1, 2, 3 factors, but this factor here has at most 2 solutions. Notice the 2 tells us that 2 solutions will come from here. Okay? So from these two, let's do these. These are called linear because it's just x to the first power. This is considered quadratic, this factor, because it's got to the second power. Okay? So the linear factors are just found by finding the opposite of this number. So what's the opposite of negative 2? Positive 2. Okay, and the opposite of positive 2 is negative 2. So those are my 2 solutions for each of these factors. But remember, we have 2 solutions that will come from this one as well. So let's go ahead and set this equal to 0. I'll do it over here on the left. I'll do it over here on the right. And so this will be x squared minus 6 equals 0. And let's just solve. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add 6 to both sides. I get x squared equals 6. Square root both sides. The 2 canceled out with the radical, the exponent 2. And I end up with x equals plus or minus square root of 6. Remember, we've been using the list of perfect squares. 6 comes right after 4 on the list of perfect squares. Remember the list here? 1, 4, 9, 16, and so on. So 6 would be after the 4. And notice here, we can't divide 6 by 4 and get a perfect square there. So 6 divided by 4 will give us a decimal. So that means that these are just going to be my 2 other solutions here. Okay, so x equals plus or minus radical 6. So that counts as 2, the positive radical 6 and the negative radical 6. So a total of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can go ahead and write your answers like this. So square root of 6, negative square root of 6, 2, and negative 2. Those are all my solutions. Okay? This is the next one the same way. And these are all factorable, by the way. It's designed that way. Now, we will do some problems where you won't be able to factor, and for that, we'll have to use a quadratic formula. Okay? But let's jump into this one here. So we have x squared times x squared. And then we need a negative 4, but a positive 3 when I add. So first thing that comes to mind is 4 times 1. I need a negative 4, but a positive 3. So I'm going to make the 1 negative. So I'll put plus 4 minus 1. Okay? Look at this. Another difference of squares here. So I'm going to do x minus 1 times x plus 1. And this one here is just going to be the same, x squared plus 4. And then don't forget the equal 0 at the end. So my 2 solutions here are this one for the linears are going to be positive 1, and then here this one's going to be negative 1. Now what about this one? This is not a difference of squares, so we need to solve for it. So let's go ahead and do x squared plus 4 equals 0. Subtract 4 on both sides. I get x squared equals negative 4. Okay? So similar to the step that we did here, we're going to go ahead and square root both sides. But look here, we end up with a negative inside the radical. So this is going to be, don't forget your plus or minus, by the way. This is going to be an I, an imaginary answer. Now, leave the 4 inside. But wait a minute, what's the square root of 4? Well, that's just 2. That's a perfect square. Notice here it's on the list. So all the ones on the list are actually perfect squares. So the square root of 4 is 2. So my answer is going to be like this. Plus or minus 2i. So no more square root there. So x equals plus or minus 2i. And I can write my answers like this. Okay, so it'll be positive 2i, negative 2i, 1, and negative 1. Okay, let's move on to this one here now, to the 6th power. Notice here how we have all of these have an x to the 2nd power, okay, or they all have at least x squared. So this one has x to the 6th, x to the 4th, x to the 2nd, so they all have at least 2 x's. So I'm going to factor that out. I'm going to factor out an x squared. And I'm going to be left with x to the 4th minus 9x squared plus 14 equals 0. Notice all I did was I removed 2 x's from each term. I really divided by x squared. I divided out an x squared, and that's what I'm left with when I distribute here. Notice x squared times x to the 4th is x to the 6th. X squared times negative 9x squared is negative 9x to the 4th. And then x squared times 14 is 14x squared. Okay, so notice it becomes quartic. Okay, so let's just leave the x squared there, and let's factor these two here. So this will be x squared times x squared. Now we have 14 there, okay? 14 and then negative 9. So 7 times 2 is 14, but if I make them both negative, that'll give me the negative 9 that I want. Okay? So now notice here. I'm going to end up with 2 solutions from here, 2 from here, and 2 from here. Now notice x squared is just by itself. It doesn't say x squared minus something or x squared plus something. So you can think of this as x squared plus 0. You can think of it like that. Okay? So we can set all these equal to 0 and then solve. Okay, so let's start with x squared minus 2. So I'll do that right here. X squared minus 2 equals 0. And let's solve. Let's go ahead and add 2 on both sides. I get x squared equals 2. Square root both sides, and I end up with x equals plus or minus square root of 2. Okay? This is the next one. X squared minus 7 equals 0. Add 7 to both sides. X squared equals 7. And then square root both sides. X equals plus or minus square root of 7. Don't forget the plus or minus, okay? And finally, you can think of this as x squared plus 0. So let's just write x squared plus 0 equals 0. So then we just subtract 0 on both sides, which is not going to change anything. It's just going to say x squared equals 0. Square root both sides. And I get x squared, I get x equals plus or minus 0. Okay? Notice I have 6 as my exponent here. That means I should have at most 6 solutions. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 right there. Okay, so the 0 actually repeats twice. Okay? All right. 2 more to go. Same as the last example here. We have x to the 6th power. All these have an x squared in common, so we're going to go ahead and factor out an x squared. Okay? So that leaves me with x to the 4th minus 17x squared plus 72 equals 0. So let's find factors of 72 that also give me negative 17. Well, 9 times 8 is 72. But I need a negative 17, so let's make these both negative, and there you go. So this will be x squared times x. Well, x squared and x squared there. And then we just said we're going to use minus 9 and minus 8. Don't forget the equal 0 there. And then notice here I have a difference of squares right there. Okay, so I'm going to factor this further. This will be x minus 3 times x plus 3. And let's bring everything else down. X squared minus 8 equals 0. And then x squared. Let's solve the linears. We could do those mentally. So it'll just be the opposite of that number there. So it'll be x equals 3 and x equals negative 3. So far I have my 2 solutions there. I need 4 more. So let's solve this one here. X squared minus 8 equals 0. Let's do this off to the side. Add 8 to both sides. I get x squared equals 8. Square root both sides. I get x equals plus or minus. Whoa. Actually, 8 can be divided by, notice here my list, 1, 4, 9. 8 can be divided by 4. So this can be written as 4 times 2, right? Isn't that 8? But what's the square root of 4? Well, it's 2. So this will be plus or minus 2 radical 2. Notice this 2 stays inside. And this 4, the square root of 4, became 2, the 2 that you see on the outside. Okay? So this represents 2 answers, 2 radical 2 and a negative 2 radical 2. So x equals plus or minus 2 radical 2, or 2 square root of 2. And then we already did this one on the last one. Whenever it's just x squared and it doesn't say plus some other number, then we know it's just going to be 2 zeros there, okay? So we can say here x equals plus or minus 0. Now remember, 0 is neither positive or negative. 0 is actually just in between the positive and negative. So 0 is just 0 without the plus or minus. But we still write plus or minus just to point out that it's 2 solutions, but I really don't need them, okay? Okay. And I did that on the last one too. I left a plus or minus, but in reality, you only need to write it once. But when you write it in your answer like this here, you can say 0, 0, and then 3, negative 3, and then 2 radical 2, that's positive, and negative 2 radical 2. So notice here are my 6 solutions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I didn't do that on the last one. Let me do it right now. So for this one here, I'll write it here. This should be 0 and then 0 again. No positive or negative needed. And then we have positive radical 7, negative radical 7. And then positive radical 2 and negative radical 2. I wrote the positive there, which is really not necessary. Okay? So those are my 6 solutions here. All right. Let's finish the last one. And if you want to try this one before I do it, go ahead. Okay? Now, I'm going to factor out an x squared here, and that's going to be x to the 4th plus 5x squared minus 14 equals 0. Okay? Again, we're going to write x squared outside, and then we're going to factor this. So this will be x squared times x squared. And then we need a negative 14 here. So I'll do 7 times 2. Notice here I also need a 5, so I'll make the 2 negative. So this will be minus 2 and plus 7. Okay? And so no difference of squares here, so I'm just going to go ahead and solve each of these independently. So here we have x squared minus 2 equals 0. Let's add 2 to both sides. X squared equals 2. Oops. Yeah. And then square root both sides. Those cancel out. I get x equals plus or minus square root of 2. So those are my 2 solutions for this factor here. Now this is the same thing with this one here. So we have x squared plus 7 equals 0. Subtract 7. X squared equals negative 7. And then we have to square root both sides. And we get x equals, well, there's our imaginary here, plus or minus I radical 7. Now notice 7, I can't divide by 4 and get a nice whole number. So then that means that the 7 remains inside, okay? So I have 2 solutions here, 2 solutions there. And what 2 solutions come from the x squared? Well, we end up with 2 zeros, okay? 0 and 0. So my final answer here is 0, 0. Positive radical 2, negative radical 2. I don't need the positive there. I could have just not written it. And then we have positive I radical 7 and negative I radical 7. Okay? And that's it.